All right. So, assuming we remember most of what was laid out the first time around, do you think I should go over any of the details of how to set things up again, or we'll skip that?
It's up to you as long as it's short. I have sent everybody the recording of last week, but I mean,
Okay.
and it was though with the YouTube clip separately, so
Yeah. Okay.
whatever. Yeah, sure.
Okay. So as a quick refresh here, the idea of the workflow here is that there is a call. That call will contain all of your speakers, any moderators, or anybody involved in the behind the scenes aspects of the event. Everything gets ingested into my switcher mixer, the vMix system. There we can add all the graphics and titles, video playback, and most importantly, the virtual curtain and slate. And from there, it gets broadcast either back into WebEx, as you're seeing now, or into some kind of external player that can be embedded into a website. Moving forward, we can add in gamification. We can add in third-party polling and slides. Any graphical content that we want to mix into the show can now be brought in very, very quickly and seamlessly. And the last thing, using Internet Clicker as our virtual perfect queue, if you will. So anybody can advance the slides. That can be either a coordinator or the presenter themselves from any remote location, just following a simple internet URL. So back into the show. So we went over some of the basics, which was we can obviously have graphics and audio. So let me kill that audio. And I want to show you something else while we're here. So it's very simple and easy for me to update the information on this slide, which I think we went over, but I'll just do that one more time here. So I can have presets that are stored, or I can have, yeah, so this says will begin shortly, or the event will start shortly, or anything like that. We can change start after a, and as you can see, this is interesting because it is real time. So there is some potential to use, maybe spell things right. But that's just a neat little feature where any text that I bring into the program can be either brought in as static text, which is input by me locally, or it could be brought in as a data source or something along those lines. So either from a web feed or perhaps ingesting something like a social media feed or something like that, right? And those can be brought into your holding graphics, which can bring some entertainment to changeovers and breaks, so they don't necessarily have to be boring pauses waiting for a show to come back online. We went over our basics, which is our simple one-up shot with some overlay graphics. One more thing to look at there is now you should be able to see the transitions a little bit better through WebEx. So a simple fade comes through okay, not as nice as it would on a final stream, but adequate. And the stinger transition there, pretty smooth, all things considered, coming through WebEx as a screen share. The resolution is good, it looks like, and it looks like the frame rate is pretty quick. So a step up in that way if you've been experiencing issues with embedded videos and PowerPoints or anything like that that have been kind of coming through choppy and that sort of thing. We have our standard 2-up look, which can be modified as you saw before. Just a reminder of how this is being masked, just a simple zoom overlay. And all the graphics are adjustable. Our 3-up look, very similar, same scenario. This 3-up one is interesting because you can always, you can do something different with the leftover space, just based on the way that the interface lays out. You're given quite a bit of room on either side. And again, I don't know how WebEx, if you have 3 people on WebEx, if it does the same sort of 2 on top and 1 on the bottom, or if it shifts to one side or the other. But you do have this extra space to play with where you could embed either, coming up next or graphical content, that kind of thing. We have our titles, which are nice, easy on and off. And those graphics can be obviously managed in any way you'd like. There's our 4-up zoom overlay, a little more simplistic based on the complexity of the 4 shots. We have our virtual set, which doesn't have to be limited to 2 camera. It could be 2, 4, 3, or more. And within that, we can either easily cut between our 2 camera shots, or we can use either a slow or fast move to kind of slide between them. But I think it looks best when you pull out to a full shot and go back. So just some smooth little animations to work with on the show. This we went over. So moving forward, something we didn't really get to, I don't think, here was when we start introducing slide content. So this is a very simple slide picture-in-picture. This can be played with in many different ways. Again, the layout ideas are endless. You have, in this instance, this is your typical format where you would have a single person speaking to a PowerPoint. Now, if you did have a group of people and that smaller window was using an auto transition, so, your active speaker within WebEx or Zoom, you can have multiple people presenting to the same slides and their face would just swap into that box, in the same box. I think trying to bring too many things to this type of layout is actually not better. I think it can actually be detrimental to the final output. Remembering that a lot of people, depending on where they're watching this, if it's in a web page or if it's on WebEx, they may have smaller screens. They may have it kind of minimized off to one side. A lot of people never go full screen on a player. So I find I like to keep graphics and things within this realm a little bit bigger than you would expect from maybe a television broadcast where you'd be typically watching that on a 50, 60, 100-inch TV, depending on who you are. And so I think this is a kind of a neat way when you end up with a very large amount of content. So let's say we move forward to a slide that has maybe a lot of detail. This is what we call the merge command. And it's very cool. It'll take a content that's currently on air and it'll resize it without removing it from air. So here's the example. So we can zoom into that slide, see some detail, and quickly come back to our presenter anytime we'd like. And I just think that is everything for me. I think that's a really smooth way to bring in content. And, again, same idea here. So if I were to go back to our single speaker, we can merge that speaker in. And of course, we can always cut to full screen content if we need it. So that's your standard pip. And again, so a merge would keep that same content active and move it on.
Quick question about that. Is that cue need to be rehearsed in advance, or is that something that the speaker could do on his own, or it has to be done kind of by...
It really has nothing to do with the speaker. It's more the decision that we make of how to display the content. So you'll find some people presenting in the virtual environment can be kind of, I don't know, nervous maybe is the right word, or just overwhelmed by the technology. And so they might be fidgeting a little too much in their little pip window. And, in that instance, that's when we would happily merge up to some full screen content. Or likewise, if you have a connection issue, so maybe your presenter has had an issue with connectivity. So what they can do is they can stop their video and they can continue to speak over the PowerPoint. And another point to that, which actually, unfortunately, I didn't build into this show, is we can have a standby slideshow of each presenter. So if you've got, say, 6 panelists and one of them goes missing, but maybe their audio is still connected or they dial in on a phone, we can showcase their photo instead. And that's something, again, it works best in the scenario where we're dealing with a single speaker. It's not best to use that in this type of thing. Anytime we're doing sort of these multi-looks, what you want to do is you want to just make sure that your presenters are ready and actively online with their cameras ready and kind of queued up. And again, I think that comes back to designing the show in such a way that you have time to prep those presenters, bring them in, and then pause for a break or whatever and get ready for the next segment. Any questions there? Great. So if we're looking at something along these lines, we'll sting over to this transition here. And something worth noting is those stings, as I've said before, that video content can be anything you'd like, but it can also be accompanied with audio, depending on the content you're trying to put forward. Let's say you were doing financial review, and you were looking at the year's financials, and you wanted to have a little kind of, I don't know, a little energy driving into that, because everybody knows that those are a little bit dry. So you could have maybe like a little amp up music or video that goes along with some kind of transition like this. What's interesting is, much like the video with vMix, I have control over what gets returned to that primary call. So we have our presenters in one call and our final showcase in another call or on another platform. I don't have to send everything to both. I can send content easily to the final output while remaining silent or, in a blind mode for the participants on the presenter side of things. Where that can be useful is, again, if I were to roll something like this into an introduction video, this can be going live. Let me mute that so I don't have to talk over it. So that can be going live to web, and I'll bring that in at a lower volume here. So that can be going out to web and not be presented to the speakers. So they'll see the graphic, they know that things are covered, but they don't necessarily have to worry about, they can talk behind the scenes pre-show. So back to the content here. So this is, as you see here, this is Slido embedded in the similar layout as our PowerPoint was, which is really nice. If you were to say have this presenter going and they reach a point in the show and they say, hey, we have some questions, let's take a look at the questions. So I can push this and we would see the questions pop up. If we wanted to take a little bit more time to examine those questions, or maybe they're kind of wordy, we can obviously merge that up to a bigger show and start to see the voting, and at the same time sort of covering the presenters so they can kind of take a moment to gather their thoughts if they need to, or jump back to a host or something along those lines. So that's that content. And let's see what else we got here. So video playback, pretty basic, same idea. If I hit go, you'll see and hear it come through. And again, this is something that can be curated based on what you want to see, what you want the presenters to see within their experience. Maybe you're running a 1 hour pre-recorded content and you don't want to subject the presenters who are waiting in queue to that 1 hour of content. That can be going directly to the final program and be bypassed for the back end. So that's the majority of the sort of standard features we have here. Just a inclusion, again, can be modified and changed in any way you'd like. And I guess maybe let me show you how simple that is just for a hot second here. So if I've got this here is a one color, and if I swap that over, all of a sudden we're running new content. And as we kind of talked about before, that's really valuable if you're creating a template that you want to run across a series of shows, and maybe change out sponsor logos or background content or just color scheme in general, that kind of thing. So that's the majority of what I would say is the final output. There is lots more you can do, but I think this is sort of within the scope of what these type of meetings I think would include. Let me show you a little bit more of that back panel. And for me, that's a completely separate output. So you'll see here. So this is what we went over a little bit last time, just briefly. This is what your presenters would see. And so you have the choice of them constantly seeing slides or constantly seeing Q&A, or even further, if we have enough time to kind of pre-program this properly, they can see content maybe that only pertains to their specific segment. So if you have a panel discussion with two people and they're not referencing a slide, maybe there's no content here and nothing to distract them, or just the timer, or anything like that. When you roll a video, so if I roll a video now, this will go live to program, which we're no longer seeing. We're only seeing this customized presenter view. You'll see how that video comes in here. And it's good as a presenter. Maybe you want this text on top or don't, but you essentially have the choice as to displaying any information you may need on that video content differently.
So do you mean that that's what they could see while they're presenting? Like you could see a timer and
exactly,
and kind of the slide being
right,
whatever is active, or video, or whatever it is. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. And it's not common that I would send the final program back into this window. I find that distracting for people when they start seeing themselves with maybe a little bit of delay and that kind of thing. Some people find that helpful to know if they're on air. So for instance, and I'll show you how quickly we can sort of build something like this. If we wanted to add a small window that was showcasing whomever is currently speaking on the Zoom or WebEx platform, we can take that and we can just add it sort of in the corner, and then that way they'll know who's currently speaking. But with a platform like WebEx or Zoom, you can follow along within the feature set of the platform. And so I find that taking up screen real estate on this presenter view isn't necessarily the best case scenario.
Because I think you're right. So because and this is what I was kind of thinking, that because if we were to use it in either the WebEx meeting or the WebEx events, you still see at the top, or whatever the view we decide, you still see who the speakers, who's attending, or in events, you get to choose if it's only the panelists and so on. It may only apply. I can see this happening depending how we want it on the recording end, because we have an option in our recording to just do kind of the presentation slide. So I wonder if we record that on our WebEx platform, if it only takes the output you're giving us, meaning it will give us the full screen wherever you put the speaker and so on, because you're the one controlling that as like the
right. So typically from
one source, right? They would take, so it's either they take whatever's on that source and then the panelists at the top, or we choose to not have any panelists in whatever the source is. And if you're putting the speaker in there, then we would see it. It just depends how we want to find it.
So as far as recording goes, typically I would do the recording locally on the vMix system. And that would be first and foremost the highest quality that we could get. Secondly, it would be recording program. So if there's any dialogue that's happening behind the scenes before the show starts, that's all private. So that does, like, again, as I've said in the beginning, it gives us that extra layer, that curtain, that security to sort of separate the presenters from the final output. So the final output will only ever see what they see. And so whichever platform that is, whether it's Vimeo or YouTube or even another WebEx meeting, those can all be recorded on those services as well. So that gives us a little bit of redundancy where we can record here. You could record within the presenter meeting, and you can record on the final output as well. So that's really nice if you intended to maybe
like a video reel or something of the virtual event.
Yeah, or if you, for instance, and it does happen oftentimes, you might have a glitch. Perhaps I made a mistake, and I don't want to say that it's me that did it, but perhaps we put the wrong title on someone's image. And if we're recording in the primary WebEx meeting, if we needed to do an edit for re-release of the footage, you could always take that little bit of WebEx footage, slice it in, or if there is a slide going at the same time, we can always go full screen slide, so it's voice over PowerPoint for a second or two and come back. And so you do have a little bit of flexibility when you record in different locations.
Right.
it will still happen for the live audience, unfortunately, but that's depending on if your content is intended to be redistributed or whatever the final plan is. It usually will dictate how delicate the recording needs to be.
So I'm sure maybe you have more to talk about, but one thing that kind of comes to me. So for us, I know we have very options. Like we could use Zoom, which probably would be one of the best for us, or maybe not, but it could be Vimeo or something else. But meaning outside of WebEx, because we're also still limited to what WebEx function has. But
right.
Even in this one right now, I'm like, wow, like if we were doing our AGM and we wanted to have some more spice, so we can have our speakers in one room, obviously our WebEx link, you're doing your vMix. We have this output, it could be either an event or it could be just a meeting, because at the end of the day, this may be the way that everybody can kind of have an option to see everybody, or be, full screen and just watch, the show.
And I think to speak to your point, if we were, let's say you wanted to use the WebEx platform solely one meeting, right? You don't want to do the 2-layer sort of ingestion and final output. This could be your PowerPoint. This could be your video playback. It doesn't need to include any of the presenters. So they could still show up as you and I currently do in the top window. And you can sort of do maybe the scaled back version, whereas my role is simply to playback, organize, and curate the content so that, as an example, if let's say we get to a part in the show where nobody's talking for a long time, well, we can always just go back to a solid, solid graphic, right? Or there's always the possibility that I can turn the screen share off for a second. That's an option as well.
I think you brought up something very interesting that especially when I'm thinking using this very much for any future webinar that we want to enhance. It can be used also on our internal event where we don't want to spend a lot of money, but we want, something a bit better. We want a little bit more entertainment for our, partners, and just like step it up a little bit. I can see this really working very well, but you brought up something very important for us to think about, is how we want to design our webinar. And this is something we need to actively think, because right now there's not a lot, there is a little bit of design, but we're really going in with the motion. This is what our preferred setting for recording. And then we go through, we have an opening kind of housekeeping notes, and then we start recording. We have, sometimes an opening slide, sometimes we don't, depending what we do. Sometimes we have PowerPoint, sometimes we don't, but there's not a lot of design. We do, I guess I could call it that, when we do a dry run, we somewhat, but it was really just going at the mercy of what WebEx is doing, where I think working with you, we get to design our webinar, design a flow of our event with the agenda, and make sure that, everything. So it's something that we had, obviously we will have to curate and plan in advance, and it offer a little bit more depth to what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of take that either one step back or one step forward would be, it doesn't have to be complex. It could be a single PowerPoint, and I could be here managing the PowerPoint. So you can either have let's say it's a keynote speaker, and it's something where maybe it is someone talking about financials, and you in the back end could be making those slide advancements through the remote controller. I can ensure that it's there and clean and looking good and all that. And you can follow along and hit the cues. And that sort of teamed approach, it first and foremost, it gives multiple eyes on the final output. So we can ensure that the quality is there. But outside of that, it also means that nobody's fiddling around with screen shares. And it takes a lot of the technology out of the hands of the presenters, which in my opinion really opens up their ability to present to the best of their ability. And I think this is something that I always come back to, is like a presenter, in my opinion, always talks to me in the worst moments of their life. It's the 5 minutes before they have to present, and nobody enjoys that time. And so it's always my job to ensure that they're comfortable. And that's the key to a good presentation, is not just what they've prepared, but making sure that everything goes off the way they've prepared it.
So question about the clicker thing. I really like that kind of the remote clicker we have, for those who have, let's say, a fully charged phone and they're comfortable with not getting, a phone call in the middle of it. You could really basically advance their slide through, clicking on their phone or having a second browser and advancing it there, or minimizing on their screen, whatever you want to do.
Yep.
And how seamless it is to also switch from one to another. Let's say we're both presenters, we could have that same browser open, but if we click, and it's the same slide, but like right now, that's my portion. I could advance them, and then next it's Marcel, and Marcel started advancing his slide. Like sometimes I find that, next slide, please, to me, when I hear that, somehow, I know it's done all the time, I just don't like it. I feel like it takes away from what you're saying. It's distracting. People are no longer paying attention to what you're saying. You just heard next slide, right? When it's more seamless, there's a power to that, I find.
Definitely. Yeah. Especially with a keynote. When it is just a standard board meeting and that kind of thing, not as important, right? A little more casual in that way. But if you're doing a formal presentation, it really brings the show together. So as far as seamless goes, it's as seamless as you want it to be. Essentially, within the software, you can allow multiple controllers. So we could have one code and one link, and that would be the simplest way. Or what you can do is you can have a curated link for each presenter, and on the back end, it shows you who's connected. So I have a web panel that I would choose, and this is something that I would offer up to you as well to help facilitate the movements, right? Is if you have that same web panel open, you could be there assigning to say, okay, we know that such and such is up next, and they're actively able to click. And if I show you the interface again here, you'll see there's it says clicking disabled in the top left corner. And with that clicking disabled, it's a notification that pops up when you're turned on or not.
Got it.
There is another feature set as well that is really kind of it's sort of been in development with this particular one, Internet Clicker, but it's a screen share. So in the top right corner of that window, you would see a small slide, and you can actually make that bigger if you like. Now, I often like to showcase the slides back into the meeting so that they don't have to direct their focus too far away. And that's where I think using a phone as the actual advancer is a good way to go. Or if they're like me and they've got way too many monitors in front of them, they could choose which monitor to put it on. And
Well, why I like that, especially if they can use, let's say, their phone, it kind of takes them back to the day where they were in a meeting room, where their original comfort level was, and they just kind of like talk. I know they talk to the camera still, and you see their slide in front of them, but they're just advancing the slide. Because it's back a bit to the old style, instead of like,
gives them something to do with their hand, and like
there was that, for those who are standing or sitting, whatever, I like that.
And that's a great point. And one way I like to describe this often to people is that what you're seeing within this WebEx meeting, my screen share, you can think of as a traditional projector, what you'd find in a traditional on-site meeting. And I'm in control. You have to put your faith in me. And once you do, you're going to have a nice experience, but you got to get there first, sort of thing.
Right. Exactly.
And some people, just like in the days of old, if you will, some people can't handle 2 buttons or 1 button. So sometimes you have to either take that control away from them, or as you said, there's also a way that like a traditional perfect queue. And again, I don't know how much you're familiar with it, but you can disable direct control. So we can sit here and we can watch a blinking light. So when they click, we would see that light and we can manually advance. And that's useful if you have, for instance, sensitive content that you need to sort of allow to only appear in a specific manner, something like an award show, where you don't want to give anybody control of true control. You want to give sort of just that cue. And it works very, very, very similar to what you'd expect from a traditional perfect queue system. There are multiple companies doing this, and they're kind of exploding day by day, just like all of this stuff.
Mhm.
OctoQ is one that is well regarded. Internet Clicker is one that I personally use and like. I won't lie to you, primarily for the cost versus value. Um, but there are some newer ones that are coming out, and there are also Google's kind of getting into it with their whole Google Slides and that whole thing. So there's some other stuff going on, right? Now, that's a good point that I kind of stumbled onto there with the Google Slides. We could use, instead of using traditional PowerPoints and you have to forward me a bunch of documents that I need to load up and make sure that they're ready to go, you could simply just upload everything as a Google slide. And I can live within a browser. So that browser would be over here on another machine, and I would be capturing that display. So the internet clicker would be advancing that Google Slides, and I would be capturing it. And you could also, if you needed to update something on a slide, maybe 5 minutes before the show, instead of having to bother me and say, hey, I got new content for you and that kind of thing, and worry about, oh, we're on revision 5 or not,
Yeah.
you have that content online, and it's ready to go.
However, I'm not very familiar, but I mean, I'm familiar with Google Slides and the online sharing. But what I'm pretty sure is I doubt we are using those format just as a company itself, and it has their security and
Understood.
privacy.
Right.
I'm pretty sure not. I'm not 100%, but from everything I've learned so far from our company, is I doubt this is something we do. But we may have a different version that we use.
Sure. Yeah.
Different. I know we use some other kind of document sharing. So
Yep.
that said, I'm not saying that that idea may not be. It may be possible, but maybe with a different system, or we may have to still be a little bit more traditional, where we, maybe we share. I'm not sure if it's a SharePoint. I think we have a hub anyway that we can share larger documents and stuff
Something
like
like
that. Maybe that's what we
Dropbox or
use.
Google Drive or whatever.
Yeah, that's something like this. So we would share with you and maybe go that traditional route, and then you upload those on your end. But when we're ready for that, and especially when we come to sensitive documents, we'll find a way of
Right.
making. Or right now, even talking about designing an event or different things, even on our end, high executive now, they're finding a different ways of maybe no longer sharing that information and finding a different way of sharing that information. Meaning, like during the meeting, because it's on WebEx and everybody's there, it's not shared there. It's shared as a
Like
PDF.
materials. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's shared
Yeah.
differently. So, everybody's rethinking of different ways of doing it. And even though it may not have been the traditional to do it, this could be either the new way
Yeah,
or
and you
different.
could always have a reference. For instance, a slide that says, "Hey, go look at
Refer
this
to,
material." Yeah, exactly.
good point.
And that
Yeah.
content again allows you still to keep your branding on point and have a nice seamless show while still directing people elsewhere. Another way is using QR codes. Not sure if that's something you would get into, but it is entirely possible. Much like the Slido here,
Yeah.
someone would just simply snap that with their phone, and they'd have that content in their hand.
Right. It could be a PDF. It could be
Could be
a game.
anything.
It
Yeah.
could be anything. Right. It could be.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I like that too. Again, it allows us that if we are going to a virtual event, again, deciding, innovating, designing it in advance so that we can make it more fun as well for the people attending, especially when get a feeling we're going to be here for a little bit longer. So
Yeah, definitely. So something else that kind of lays into that same groundwork of how content is shared. I'm going to go back to what I was showcasing here, uh, the presenter view, and I want to show you something that could be very neat. And forgive me, this is a little bit off the cuff, so the content I'm sharing is not sensitive, but it's not curated, if you will. So it's a script, and essentially we can use this same layout here. So I'm just building this on the fly.
it could be used as almost like a prompter for a presenter.
Exactly.
Oh,
so check this out. Super, 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 super simple. There you go. There's the teleprompter. So this, and again, okay, so let me showcase it a little bit better within the realm that it would be living in. For instance, there you go. That is, they can see their slide and they can see their notes. And that's really helpful because from a webcam presenter, I'm here. I'm with you now. I'm properly presenting to you because all I
Yeah.
have to do is look forward. Now, again, this is very much, there is a little bit of work that is involved with this. If they're going to click next slide, maybe it's triggered by that same action. Maybe it's done by their assistant, or I don't know specifically how your presenters operate, but maybe they have someone who's second in command that kind of does that sort of thing for them.
What would you recommend though, if let's say it is one slide, but it's a lot of notes? Like example, if I think of a webinar, like we're gonna have, early June, it's the slide may be content heavy too, but it's like I say, it's a graphic, it's whatever, and they're gonna have a lot of notes to go through. And some of our presenter a little bit more old school, or just a little bit more to be safe. They always write everything, but the problem is they often print it and they read it like this. So we're like, okay, we're having a bit of an issue, but you know what? They're the pros, and sometimes we're coaching them as best as we can. But if their notes would be on the screen like this, and we could, it would be easier. However, there would be a lot of notes. So is there a way to scrolling through it, or kind of, like advancing them, or just not the slide, but just like the notes itself?
What we would do and what we could do, and unfortunately this is one of those things where it becomes a little harder for me to do alone, and definitely would require a little bit more assistance. What we could do is something similar to this, where you see the notes here. In the top left corner, we can have a slide number and maybe a small graphic of the slide. And so what I would do is I would break the script into however many slides it needs to be. And whenever there's a slide change, we manually advance it, but according to their notes. So when they reach that note, then we go forward. There are ways to automate this. For instance, if you had two PowerPoints and one was the notes and one was the slides, you could replicate the same slide many times until it needed to change. And then,
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So you have two slide decks that are equally 20 slides long. And every time you click next, you may see the same image again, but it's at least moving in tandem.
Well, let's just say this one of those, very content heavy, but very, very anticipated, very highly attended as well. One of our biggest events that we do twice a year. And it's one of those where the guys always say, oh, next please, or next slide. And it may still be that way. And if we were to engage somebody like you, maybe it's okay to still do next slide and you're the one advancing the slides, which is not a big deal. I'm just trying to think of, when you're with more, how to just, elevate it if we can. And if we,
definitely. And I could see right away that like introducing the idea of a teleprompter here has just sparked all kinds of imagination for you, because it in a formal remarks, let's say something like an AGM, where you have a very particular set of things that you need to go through, having these kind of cues for the presenters is something that they've been in the dark on these Zoom and WebEx meetings for the last year. So introducing them to these feature sets that they were familiar with, maybe when you did town hall meetings and that kind of thing, really sort of brings it back, like you said, to the before times.
Yeah, I like this. So we're on top of the hour. Like, is there anything else you wanted to show? And I'm glad, because at the end of the day, this may just be that one recording that everybody needs to see, because it recaps very quickly what you did at the beginning and goes through in more details at this point.
Nothing much other than the last thing I could showcase would be using the text input here. So I'm going to send you a link in the chat, and let's see how it works out for you. It should work out that enter chat message to, all right, I'll send it directly to you. So there's a link, and if you follow that link, it should take you to a Google Sheet, hopefully with no restrictions.
Yep, 1 second. Yep.
And you'll see on the bottom left, you have titles and messages. Jump over to the messages sheet.
Yeah.
And you'll see there's a big old text box there. Double click that, and go ahead and type whatever you'd like. And push enter. and in about 5 seconds time, it shall refresh on the screen here.
Oh, look at that.
So as a back-end chat system with your presenter, if you wanted to say something like, you've got 5 minutes left, please stop talking, we're tired, can we go home, those kind of things, you have direct access to whomever is speaking, assuming that they're paying attention to the screen.
Can I just delete and do a new one, basically?
You can, yeah, that's totally you.
Okay. I like it.
There you go. So much like that, we could do, depending on how we design this is just an Excel spreadsheet. So if it's done, with, what do you call them, formulas and that kind of thing, you could have some pre-canned messages like, your mic is muted, please stand by, turn your camera off, turn your camera on, we're going to break, those type of things. And you could sort of drag and drop them in there, or maybe even just click them as a button. The sky is the limit, and that same principle applies to anything, even in terms of like the graphical content, or if you jump back over to that title tab there at the bottom, the title sheet, and I'll just showcase here. So if I go with a live title, if you replace that Harvey Keitel, you would have full access to modify a name. So in these type of shows where maybe I'm not being brought into the show so early on because of maybe budgetary restrictions or whatever, if you follow this template and you provide me this content, I can easily drop it in, and it's a simple format. It says name and title, could say name, title, sponsor, whatever you want. Basically, as long as there are 3 data categories, I can pull those in. And this logo that you're seeing here, the little submarine, that's also that's also part of that same content that could be loaded externally.
Nice.
So yeah, I just wanted to showcase that the idea of active elements that are changing in real time based on either direct input or, again, something like, let's say you have a website, and on that website there's featured person of the month or person of the year. We could find a way to extract that data and just have it cycling through, or anything like that. There's lots of play.
So I can see this. Let's say there's something super private. They don't want to tell anybody. I don't know. And they usually announce it in advance. Not announce, but they usually know in advance. But let's say they did not know in advance who the new partner were this year, and they wanted to literally announce everybody live. So they could basically announce those names. Nobody knows, but whoever the person can type those names, and it would just appear, kind of something like this, for example.
Yeah, and I mean, we have the opportunity, because I'm controlling the behind the scenes, we have the opportunity of holding that information if we know it in advance. Let's say something like a fundraiser, or maybe somebody's donation or whatever. It's a great opportunity to again bring that live data acquisition into the show.
Excellent. I like that.
I think that's it. I guess I'll leave it on this last logo here. And that gives you a good idea of what we can do.
I'll just stop the recording.